Howdy, we are now finishing up chapter 10, and I want to just finish this up with a discussion of international corporate governance, and then just a few final thoughts. So when we talk about corporate governance, it's obviously important to understand who makes decisions and the influence that they have in the organization. The corporate governance can vary around the world, and it's becoming more and more important in many different places, and how it works can vary. So globalization in trade, investments, and equity markets is stimulating an increase in the intensity of efforts to improve corporate governance and potentially reduce the variation in regions and nations' governance systems. However, the reality remains that different nations have different governance systems in place. Recognizing and understanding differences in various countries' governance systems improves the likelihood a firm will be able to compete successfully in the international markets it chooses to enter. I want to give you 3 examples of countries that have some differences in corporate governance systems, starting with Germany. So concentration of ownership is an important means of corporate governance in Germany. In many private German firms, the owner and the manager may be the same individual. In publicly traded German corporations, a single shareholder is often dominant. Historically, banks have occupied the center of the German corporate governance system, and these banks monitor and control managers both as lenders and as shareholders by electing representatives to supervisory boards. The corporate governance practices in Germany make it difficult to restructure companies as quickly as can be done in the United States, and there's a significant amount of cross-shareholding among firms, which makes takeovers more difficult. Another country that operates very differently is Japan. Attitudes toward corporate governance in Japan are affected by concepts of obligation and family. These are cultural norms that are very important in Japan. So a company can be considered a family, and families command the attention and allegiance of parties throughout corporations. A keiretsu is a group of firms tied together by cross-shareholdings. It's more than an economic concept. It too is a family, but it's a family of organizations that all work together and support one another. They also often, through their cross-shareholdings, they provide oversight to one another, and the leaders of each company feel obligated to perform well on behalf of all of the others. And this brings us to consensus, which is valued even when it results in a slow and cumbersome decision-making process. This sense of obligation and family and a desire to achieve consensus means that decisions in Japan, they may come slower, but they're likely to come very carefully. Another interesting thing here is that banks in Japan have an important role as a corporate governance mechanism in large public firms. In fact, sometimes banks occupy important roles within a keiretsu, and the bank can be one of the more influential organizations within this family of different organizations, which don't actually have to be within the same industry to have this relationship. In Japan, the stock markets, which were once weak and had some real problems with insider trading, are still young and they're developing, but improving. There's also been a gradual decline in China in the equity held in state-owned enterprises, while the number and percentage of private firms has grown. However, the state still relies on direct and/or indirect controls to influence the strategies that firms use. Private firms try to develop political ties with the government because of their role in providing access to resources and to the economy. Even when the government doesn't hold direct equity, it still holds significant influence within firms. So these are just a few examples. So when we are looking at corporate governance mechanisms, pursuing ethical behavior, it's important to serve the interests of the firm's multiple stakeholder groups. And just as a reminder of who these are, so shareholders are very important in the capital market stakeholder group. Lenders also are part of this capital market stakeholder group, but occupy a different position. So shareholders are often viewed as the most important stakeholder group. The focus of governance mechanisms is on the control of managerial decisions to assure shareholder interests. And the interests of shareholders is served by the board of directors. When we look at product market stakeholders, these are customers, suppliers, and host communities, and organizational stakeholders that may withdraw their support of the firm if their needs are not met, at least minimally. And then we have organizational stakeholders. Ethically responsible companies design and use governance mechanisms that serve all stakeholders' interests. This is important to maintain ethical behavior. And we can talk about examples like Enron, WorldCom, HealthSouth, and Tyco, and many other companies that have had significant or severe ethical problems, including fraud, that led to the loss of value for and benefit to really all stakeholder groups. As agents of the firm's owners, the board should hold top-level managers fully accountable for ethical behavior as they treat each of these stakeholder groups with respect and ethical decisions. So question number 5, what corporate governance concerns might you have when expanding a company to different countries? And how might these different stakeholder groups be affected?